There is a moment when you realize silence is no longer a phase. It is no longer strategic. It is no longer temporary. It has become permanent. For Prince Harry, that realization did not come during an argument. It did not come after an interview. It did not come with a phone call that went unanswered. It came when nothing happened, and he understood that nothing was going to happen again. Institutions do not announce finality. They normalize it. For years, Harry believed silence meant pressure, a pause, a negotiation tactic. He believed that eventually someone would step in, a private secretary, a senior royal, a trusted intermediary. Someone would say, "Enough, let's fix this." That call never came, and once enough time passes, you realize the absence itself is the answer. The palace had moved from restraint to resolution. Harry had mistaken emotional distance for institutional tension, but institutions do not feel tension. They calculate, and the calculation had already been completed. This is where the story becomes unbearable, because by the time Harry noticed the silence had hardened, it was too late to reverse it. Every institution has a threshold, a point after which re-engagement creates more instability than withdrawal. Harry crossed that threshold quietly, not through one act, but through accumulation. Interview after interview, revelation after revelation, narrative after narrative. Each one felt like progress. In reality, each one narrowed the corridor back. Inside the palace, the question was no longer, how do we reconcile? It was, what happens if we reopen this? And the answer was always the same. More exposure, more unpredictability, more erosion. So the institution did what institutions always do when re-engagement becomes a liability. It stopped responding. That is not abandonment. That is closure. The darkest part is not that Harry was excluded, it's that he was no longer considered. He was no longer part of the future models, contingency planning, or reputational frameworks. He had become historical. Meghan sensed this shift earlier than Harry, not intellectually, instinctively. You can tell when power has disengaged, when doors stop reacting, when silence loses its edge, when absence stops feeling hostile and starts feeling settled. That is when you know the system has moved on. Harry, however, was still narrating, still explaining, still justifying, still believing that clarity would produce resolution. But clarity only matters when someone is listening. The palace wasn't. It had already reorganized around his absence. This is the moment where personal pain collides with institutional reality. Harry believed truth would force a response. Institutions do not respond to truth. They respond to threat. And by choosing silence, the palace made a brutal determination. Harry was no longer a threat. He was a consequence. That realization lands like grief. Not explosive grief, but quiet, sinking grief. The kind where you stop checking your phone. The kind where you realize your name no longer activates anything behind the walls you grew up inside. The silence wasn't punishment. Punishment keeps you relevant. This was erasure. Meghan remained the only person responding at full volume, the only place where reaction still existed, and that is how isolation completes itself, not by removing people, but by reducing feedback loops. Two people talking to each other, while an institution listens no longer. From that point forward, Harry's words existed in open space. No correction, no contradiction, no acknowledgement, which means no closure. This is the most dangerous psychological state imaginable for someone raised inside hierarchy, because hierarchy tells you where you stand. Silence tells you nothing, and humans fill silence with meaning. Harry filled it with memory, with grievance, with justification. But none of it traveled back, because the palace had already archived him, not as an enemy, as a chapter. And chapters do not argue with the book. They end. The public will always ask why the palace never responds. The answer is simple. Responding would mean Harry still mattered operationally. Silence means he doesn't. That is the finality. And once you understand that silence is permanent, you stop trying to break it. You simply live beside it. And that is where Harry is now. Not outside the institution, but after it.